Everyone. This is Sadhana Alangar, HL7's Director of Education. Welcome to what promises to be an interesting discussion on rethinking medical device management. We have a distinguished set of panelists with us today. Joe Dudas, Division Chair for Supply Chain Management at Mayo Clinic. Katie Pickard, Director of New Product Development at Philips Healthcare. Patty Morrison serves on the board of directors at Baxter International. And Dr. Bill Winkenwerder, chairman of CitiusTech, will be moderating this session. Bill, at this time, if you're ready, I'm going to hand over the program to you. Hi, Bill.
Thank you, Sadhana. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon if you're well east of us here in the East Coast in the United States. Welcome to this session on rethinking medical device management. We have a great group of panelists and true subject matter experts in this realm and in this field. Our approach today is going to be to sort of work our way through 5 questions that we thought were particularly relevant to this topic. But we want to, in a broad sense, talk about the transformation of medical device management with predictive analytics, optimizing the maintenance and service costs with intelligent workflows that are augmented by AI and analytics, and also challenges, I think importantly, in the supply chain management and the challenges associated with some disruptions to either software or other important ways of moving information between the various parties that are involved here. So I'll get us started and welcome panelists. Thank you for being here. The first question, and we'll spend about 10 or 12 minutes on this. And Joe, I'm going to have you lead us off. But is what are the major disruptions happening in the medical devices industry today due to COVID? And what are the biggest challenges for medical device organizations, from your view of the world? Joe Dudas.
Yeah, thank you. First, let me thank you and CitiusTech, HL7, for having me here today, as well as it's always a pleasure to talk to you, as well as colleagues like Patty and KT. So just wanted to mention that before we get into some of the details here, particularly into the supply chain. COVID, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, it was the perfect, and still is the perfect storm as it applies to supply chains, not just in the United States, but across the world. We saw issues and continue to see issues in PPE, lab, and continue to see that. We could go into a whole bunch of symptoms, but I think the primary issue really comes into matching supply, distribution, our ability to administer, and demand. And it sounds easy, but with a system as complicated and as large as the healthcare supply chain, it's a real challenge. And you'll hear that, I think that's going to be a reoccurring theme in my responses as well as my colleagues. There are just so many tentacles, that go well beyond the obvious. Worker hiatus, due to the infection, manufacturing reprioritization, capacity ramp up, raw materials and third-party manufacturing, and even government, all have to work really well in order to meet the demands of our patients. That demand and all the way through the supply chain is just a major challenge. And when it doesn't work, it creates behaviors that are just the opposite of what the supply chain needs. You see, organizations and individuals, fending for themselves. And so you see a lot of hoarding, and that just exasperates the issue and starts to drive a new price point in the marketplace, which then, has all sorts of characters enter it even worse. So, it's just been it's been a challenge, and like I said, a perfect storm. What we see in the future, I think there's questions later in the discussion around innovation, but I think we really need innovation not only in the device and the products that flow through the supply chain, but the supply chain itself.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And I want to turn to Patty. Patty brings a terrific perspective on this topic, having served as Chief Technology Officer at Cardinal, but also on the board now at Baxter and some other companies that are heavily focused on these topics. So, Patty, share your perspectives on this with us on this particular question.
Sure. Well, I would just echo Joe's comments about supply chain. It's a major focus for our companies, the companies that I work with, including it's terrific to see you, Bill, and to be an advisor for CitiusTech. But let me give you some examples. I mean, with COVID, you had the demand that people were used to around the world completely shifting. So you have less admissions, less procedures, elective procedures, and then you have this boom in ICU. So, at Baxter, for example, we make continuous renal replacement therapies, and we can't make them fast enough because they're mission critical for ICU patients, which has increased. But then other product lines are seeing declines because of general procedure volumes for hospitals. The demand for pharmaceuticals has changed quite a bit. So, I mean, I could give you a lot of examples, but suddenly you're sitting with these manufacturing capacity and supply chain models that are not applicable to this new world. And you've had this massive amount of inventory build going on, costs going up because raw materials are impacted. And so everybody's been, I believe, doing what is in the best interest of patients. That's what we all do all the time. But we're going to have cleanup on aisle 9 when things, if they ever return to semi-normal, to really get better at forecasting demand.
Great. Excellent point. Very good thought process there. KT, from your perspective.
Sure, and I'd like to extend the welcome. Thanks for having us here. The same, largely the same, that COVID is, of course, unprecedented, and it not only has, I've certainly bought my fair share of toilet paper over the last year, in this pandemic, but it's changed a lot of patterns throughout the healthcare process in a parallel way. I work at Philips, and as you know, we build, one of the things that we build is ventilation devices. And so those ventilators, we stepped up and increased production during that disruptive time about a year ago. And these are the kinds of changes that all organizations had to face in this unprecedented time. And I think I'd like to take, at least in the States, we're almost ready to take a little breather and say, maybe things are going to, as Patty was saying, getting back to a new normal. And it gives us a moment to pause. And one of the things I'd like to add to the situation in the clinical side is the issue of burnout. We've had physicians and healthcare workers who have now been working hours that they never thought they would have had to have worked over the past year or so. And it gives us an opportunity now to look at and reevaluate the vulnerabilities that we have in supply chain, so that we can try to avoid some of these issues. And you mentioned PPE. There have been a number of issues, even in vaccine distribution, things where we could do a lot better. And those are the things that I think we could focus on now, not only with future pandemics. God help us. But just in general, that we could smooth out some of these supply chain issues to make healthcare better. And finally, I just that'll and some of the changes that we've seen around telehealth and the move to home health. I'm sure we'll get into those issues later in today's discussion, but how those things will affect us on a permanent basis. Thanks.
Great, terrific. There's a lot to talk about with respect to the impact of COVID, and we're going to continue to touch on that as we go through our questions today. But I want to move us. I want to move us along, and I'll say one other thing with respect to that is that the COVID challenge, I think, as we know, most of us would know, is going to be with us for who knows how long. And we're all obviously very hopeful of being able to bring this terrible pandemic down to a manageable level around the world. But with the world being very interconnected today, especially when it comes to equipment, supplies, materials, etc., how we build things to deliver to patients, it comes from across the world that this whole COVID pandemic has brought into very clear relief the challenges of ensuring the supply chain. So I think that's why we're immediately talking about this particular issue. So second question, traditionally medical device organizations have been servicing through on-field engineers. Do you see organizations transitioning from on-field device servicing to remote device management? And could you talk a little bit about that? KT, could you lead us off on that?
Happy to. This is an area where I think AI is going to play an interesting role. The idea of predictive maintenance, we used to do preventive maintenance, and AI helps us move to a world where we can get to, and Philips are looking for, zero downtime events in our modality businesses like CT and MR. So, it's again, early days for this, but the idea behind it is that rather than dispatching personnel, am I still audible? Things are good?
You're audible.
Okay, yeah.
The screen is frozen right now. I don't know if there's anything that can be done to open, but you're audible.
Okay, anyway, good. So yeah, so these are areas where, I'll just turn off my video. These are areas where I see a big change in the way that we manage devices moving forward. I'll take a pause and make sure that others can comment on this as well.
Okay, great. We'll turn it over to Joe. Joe, your comment on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that can be done virtually should be considered. Anything that can be done preventatively should be considered, and anything that we can do ourselves, even during COVID, once again, determining who can be on campus and who can't be on campus was a real challenge. And so I think, the more that we can do by having just essential workers, on our campuses and servicing the technology, I think it's absolutely critical and important. What we find though is in that Mayo, we have a group in our bioengineering group that has the ability to maintain equipment, complicated technical equipment. But what we often find is that our supply chain partners aren't always ready for that. And so, we need simple things like parts distribution, training, and security for when individuals do come on campus to complement our staff. One of the other things that we find really challenging is this kind of flips in many cases the economics associated with medical devices is particularly on large equipment. Often, it's not the equipment it's really driving the profitability for the organization that's selling it, but it's the services behind it. And so when you're challenging that model from an economics perspective, it's also another challenge.
Absolutely. Patty, any comments on this issue?
Yeah, I wouldn't have anything to add on the actual physical devices, but I do think that more and more devices have so much embedded software that we have to also really think through how we're delivering remote management for software, which we should be able to do, particularly as Katie said earlier, around moving to the cloud, making that process easier, making interoperability real, which is a whole nother topic, but the deployment of software fixes, bugs, enhancements, any, not just what has to be done physically to devices, but also the technology behind a lot of the firmware and devices. And I'm sure if I were CIO of Mayo or Philips, this is a question I would be asking every supplier. What is their practice for supporting the software aspects of device?
Yeah, I would agree, Patty, PHI and the protection of our patients' information, it's a brand issue for us. We just can't afford to have those types of, any of our patient information would be compromised. So, I think offline, we had talked, and, PHI is that's a never event for us. Yep.
And the same, not in addition to the PHI, the integrity of software delivery. Again, before we joined it today, we were talking about software as a medical device. And as we increasingly move to a software-based world in medicine, the delivery of that software in a robust, repeatable fashion becomes increasingly important. So the whole DevOps that we've been hearing about, the delivery operations of software, where companies like CitiusTech have a really strong understanding. These are areas where we're going to see lots of changes in medicine to again, move this remote device management as we move to cloud and analytics in cloud. These are areas where we'll see lots of improvements over the next, 2 to 3 years. Again, largely driven by COVID, amazingly enough.
Great. Wanted to just probe in a little further on one area, one aspect of this, of moving to more remote driven servicing, and that is how do you assess the performance? How do you decide which things you can, which devices or which systems you can begin to manage remotely? And then how do you assess that performance as you make that change? Joe, maybe you can, or KT, either one.
I'd start with KT this time, if you don't mind.
Sure.
KT?
So sure. So I think when you're looking at your inventory, you're going after the things that are easiest to go after. So in the clinical side, you're looking at at pumps and things of that nature, and how you can manage that fleet of inventory and manage it efficiently. And then as you grow this out, we were talking about predictive analytics and this idea of moving toward a model where you're getting a message before there's a failure in your magnet or what have you. And those are the areas where I see big changes coming. So it's an incremental process, as all things are in healthcare. We start with the small and easy, and build out from there. So it largely is, as in many of the same processes that we use, that we look for gaps and then we address them. I think this change to better management, better fleet management of remote medical devices is no different.
Yeah.
Phil.
I was gonna, since you, I was gonna suggest very similarly, KT, is that, it's a risk reward, as far as what we manage or intend to manage, particularly when it comes to a self-support type of model. It's where are the greatest risks? Where do we have the capabilities to match up with those risks, and how can we match those two, once again, kind of centered on the best interest of the patient. So very similar answer.
Bill, the only thing I would add is when you're looking at performance of devices, the one thing is to diagnose what's really a performance issue. What we find, unfortunately, is that it's a lot of training issues, and particularly today with how stretched everybody is. We talked about burnout, or even stockpiling. Some of these devices don't do well when they sit in a closet for a year, right? They need to be cleaned. They need to be operated effectively. So I think good partnerships with clinicians to make sure we're really understanding the difference between a hardware software failure versus a training issue, I think is important to pay attention to right now, especially.
Yeah, it's interesting too, Patty, is that sometimes we think about talent being exclusive to one silo within the supply chain, but we know that we hire each other's staff. So we've got talent all up and down the supply chain, and very capable individuals. So I think we just need to keep that in mind.
Great. I'm going to move us to the next question. We've already actually touched on certain aspects of this question, and I'll read the question and then and try to direct us a bit. And that is, how has the medical device supply chain changed since COVID? What are the greatest digital technology advancements that can help make supply chain more efficient? Now we've talked about this. What I'd really think our audience would like is if you could give any specific examples of how COVID changed, a certain medical device or supply material, and then how you made the adjustment, and maybe how you use digital technology to help manage it going forward. Joe or KT, either one, or.
Yeah, I think it gets back to inventory management. We've had significant changes in the area of inventory management, as well as distribution. Joe,
your sound went down. There you go.
Yep. Anyways, I was going to say inventory management and distribution practices have changed significantly, where we're stocking more of our critical products on campus than we used to. I want to say we brought up 80,000 square foot of warehouse space in a matter of weeks, and we're going to sustain that. We outsourced a lot of our distribution in the past. I think we'll continue to have partnerships, but it'll be more of an ecosystem and a much more active management of that ecosystem. And that has, once again, real ramifications as to what we're doing internally, how we're doing it internally, and what we're expect from our partners. We're seeing a greater desire for diversification of our products, which kind of challenges the old thinking of standardize. So it's some sort of balance there, because as we know, variation is a challenge too. But the other thing is that we're starting to see a preference to, and I would say once again it's a balance, but the domestic manufacturing as well, as far as resiliency in our supply chain. Those are all real things that we're seeing today, and technology as well to go along with it. As a matter of fact, we're completely redesigning our supply chain into a modern digital supply chain. So a completely different strategy there as well. So and like I said, all real activity, not something we're just talking about.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground, so I sense that there is a lot that you're doing here behind the scenes, or maybe in the front, in changing your business processes. One question, just if you're comfortable answering it, and that is, are you comfortable going to a manufacturer or supplier to tell them, we need you to do this, and we need you to do it differently, or we need, we're going to have more on site of this, or we want a guarantee around, a certainty of a certain performance or amount or kind of device or whatever.
Yeah, I would say, Bill, we've always had very collaborative and always looked at our suppliers as partners as opposed to, the enemy.
Yeah.
And so that continues, and we continue to have very transparent conversations as to what our strategy is within the supply chain and within our clinical practice. So absolutely, we're being crystal clear, transparent with what we feel the needs are, what our strategies are. And so the answer is an emphatic yes, but that hasn't necessarily changed. I think we've always tried to work with our suppliers in a way that's a win-win, as opposed to a win-lose, winner take all type environment.
Right. And then I want to get to Patty, but KT, so being on maybe potentially the other end of this discussion, working with a Mayo or other large healthcare organization, how do you approach this? Are you doing anything proactively to say, we know your world has changed, here's what we are prepared to do, or here's what we suggest or would like to do? The floor is yours. How are you approaching this?
Sure. So on the digital technology advancements, I see kind of two areas there. One, I think we've all been affected by the front end delivery of healthcare through telehealth. And we've been seeing a lot more of our doctors just like this, except that the other panel is like you, a physician. And so that's been a change that I think we're going to see a lasting, if you think of providers as part of that supply chain. So that's a major shift, I think, in healthcare delivery. So we're going to continue to see that. On the back end, though, I think we're going to see similar changes. I know, many of you may know that Philips has been involved in kind of tele-ICU products. And so we can monitor multiple ICUs. And that was kind of an early entry in this telemonitoring market. And in a similar way, we're seeing these digital technology changes in something we call the Remote Operations Control Center. It's a solution that allows you to monitor activities across different imaging centers, for example, or cardiology interventional suites, and watch how things are going in real time. So these are kind of adjunctive to the telehealth things we've been talking about, and home-based health, but they complement the idea that we can provide these services remotely. So I'd have to say that's probably from a software delivery perspective, from a services delivery perspective, the biggest change that I'm seeing as a trend. Not only this has happened before COVID, but I see COVID just amplifying this trend of delivering these services in a different way than we have in the past. And as a vendor like Philips, we're responsive to what customers are looking for, and these are the trends that we're seeing.
Yeah. Terrific. That's very helpful. And then Pat, anything else on this topic, Patty?
I would just add that if all of our audience isn't looking at their area to look at how they can use digital transformation, then they better be, because it's the organizations that are choosing to invest and accelerate in their digital transformation that are going to win in the long run. And a couple of the digital aspects, one is data. You know, do you have access and control of your data? We talk cyber separately, but you know, the data aspect is, it's really a big deal as an asset within an organization. And are you managing it correctly? Are you getting access to it? And I think probably one of the more interesting things about data is, are you able to see it in real time, not a month in arrears, you know, and our tradition of scheduled reporting. This is much more about real-time event action-oriented data that drives fast decision-making, because digital will enable speed. And boy, if I were every pharmaceutical manufacturer, medical device, I would be saying, how can we build a COVID vaccine all the time at that pace? You know, how are we going to speed things up in innovation, speed things up in supply chain? So I think data and analytics kind of comes after that, but do you have critical thinking skills? Are you really looking at the analytical footprint? Do you know how to do machine learning? Do you have enough data for machine learning? These things, I think, are really important questions, and you know, shareholders should be asking companies questions. Customers like Mayo, I'm sure, will be asking Baxter about what are you doing in digital transformation to accelerate some of the things that COVID brought to the forefront.
Well, it's interesting, Patty, because one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is a digital supply chain. You know, a digital practice needs a digital supply chain.
Yes.
So, you know, we got to think about not just the products that are coming through the supply chain, but how we support them throughout the supply chain as well.
Yeah.
It's critical, and I don't think we want to end up being the weak link in providing, you know, the best possible value once again to the patients.
Yeah, and I would just build on that and say that that, you know, when you think about data standards, the ability to talk between every aspect of the supply chain, you know, data standards are still lagging in healthcare, other industries, you know, in terms of a product identified by one UPC code or RFID or whatever, or IoT or whatever we're using, that we know that that product is the same throughout the supply chain. I mean, areas where it's regulated, like drugs, it's different, but for medical devices, it's still the Wild West, in my opinion. I think it needs work, the data standardization.
And given what's at stake, I think we need to be better than other industries.
No kidding.
People's lives. I'm going to move us on to the next question, and and I want to make sure we'll probably be a little bit shorter on this, but because I want to get us into the technology disruption and cyber issues, we want to make sure we touch on that. But just for a moment, and we've talked about some of it already, but the role of AI and automation and solving some of your challenges, that's really some of what we've just been talking about. But how do you, I'll turn to both to Joe and KT initially on this, but how do you think about using AI and automation? What approach do you take at the Mayo Clinic to gain that capability, to have the confidence in the capability, to know that you're working, either developing it yourself or working with somebody else who can help you deliver? How do you think about that? Because this is such an important capability that has the ability to impact everything you do. And I would think one of the questions is, how much do you have to build and know internally? And then what can you partner with others, you know, who are helping you build things or models or whatever that you're using from them?
Yeah, this is KT's sweet spot, so I'm going to answer briefly and turn it over to him, because he lives in this world every day. But you know, at least within our supply chain organization, and I think it's reflective of the broader organization, is, we think of, I think we've been so schooled on the limitations and what we can't do over the years with technology that at least within our supply chain, we felt it necessary to kind of work backwards a bit and really educate our overall organization as to what is possible, and to kind of break down some of the barriers of kind of the old way of thinking and some of the limitations that we've had that with the newer technologies are really being dispelled and unconstrained. So we kind of started with an educational perspective as to the art of the possible. With that, I think it goes back to once we've got everybody educated, or at least the masses educated, we can start to be smart about kind of the old way of doing things. What are our biggest pain points, and where could we apply these new capabilities to perhaps unconstrain ourselves to where we were in the past. So I think a lot of it starts with education, and I think it's so massive, Bill, that I think that you're not going to be able to go it alone. It's all going to be around ecosystems and ships, and I always find that you have to work on relationships before you need them, because when you need them, it's too late.
Right.
So those are the kind of some of the things I think as far as the approach. KT lives it in the details every day, so I think I'll turn it over to him
Let's hear from KT.
as far as his thoughts.
Yeah, terrific, Joe. Thank you, KT.
Thank you, Joe. Right, and I won't get into the weeds because it's a vast topic, but both Patty and Joe have alluded to this idea of education, and it really is this idea of having a strategy not only for your data, but how you plan to do analytics. And there are partners out there that can help you along with this journey, that will understand your kind of where you are and the curve of analytics sophistication. And I mean that in the sense that the experience level that you have as an organization. And these things cover not only your data sources and understanding where they are, your use of standards or adoption thereof, your governance models and how you plan to share this information, your cybersecurity models. It touches on all these areas. You can unpack this topic for hours. But what I really wanted to focus on with AI is not just the clinical aspects that we see the splashy headlines sometimes that are not in splashy ways that vendors hope for, which are around PHI leaks and the things we've been talking about. And of course, Philips has solutions that handle things like we were talking about ICU. We have Sentry models that help you figure out if patients are ready to be discharged, or AI-based models that help figure out if they're likely to be readmitted based on different clinical measures. So those things are in place today, and they're the early days of AI. But I really wanted to just mention that I think what we're going to see with AI and automation, and this is the automation word is key, is what some have called mundane AI, or I call boring AI. I really think that's where the changes are going to occur first. And it's actually getting into things like workflow management, prioritization of different patient, how they present, and which ones you look at first. Some triaging on the supply chain side, looking for proactively at where your shortages might come up, and so you don't have stockouts, for example. And these are things that have been around for some time. We'll just see that some of these predictive models change with the use of AI. And so we move from this reactive, or Patty was talking about a world where it's data driven and it's real time. Most of us in our journey right now are looking prospectively at data and trying to gain insights from that data. And this is where AI makes a huge difference, where you're now looking at things in real time and what is the best outcome for my patient? what are the alternatives that I could consider to move forward clinically. So these are the areas where I think AI is going to, again, early days, but will make a big difference.
Great answers and great insights. I want to, in the interest of time, move us to our last question. And it's one that certainly is on everyone's minds. And that is the technology disruption with our increasing dependency on technology to address these problems, issues, challenges, to be better at what we do, more efficient, and just better, more responsive to the customer, to the consumer, the patient, the doctor. We're using more and more technology, but that in turn increases the dependency and therefore puts an even greater premium on reliability. So the question is, what kinds of technology disruptions do you anticipate? We're already seeing some. We know a lot that the healthcare industry has been hit, like many others, but healthcare in particular by ransomware in the last year or two. I don't expect that that's going to suddenly go away, but if you could touch on some of those issues, how you're thinking about it, how you're trying to respond, how you are responding, how do we get ahead, if it's possible, of this particular issue? And I'm going to turn to you first, Joe, for the Mayo Clinic. This is a big issue.
I'm starting to hear a little bit of noise, so if it's disruptive, let me know.
Yeah.
I think I'd kind of look at this as, what are we expecting, in the next 5 to 10 years, and then, I'll let Patty and KT fill in the blanks with, what they're seeing from a product perspective up the supply chain. But there's 3 trends that we see, and we saw it before COVID as well. Place of service is predominant. So more and more of the procedures and care is being pushed outside of the hospital. I wouldn't want to forget about the hospital because we're also, at least within the United States, we have an aging population. So those that are in the hospital are staying longer. So the hospitals aren't going away anytime soon, and quite frankly, the most expensive beds are being consumed more and more in the area of the ICU. So I see that continuing. I don't know exactly when it's going to end, to be honest with you. Pay reform, paying for value, doesn't matter who's in office. That's going to continue, and I think all up and down the supply chain, we have to get better at really linking our supply chain to the value that's provided to our patients. And then the last piece that is, and we touched on it throughout most of the discussion today, is digital everywhere. And there's a lot of excitement about that, but we also need to think about the risks, and I think we touched on that a bit as well, and really the lack of standards around data security and transparency. And I think if that doesn't come together soon, I think we're going to be looking at regulation that occurs. And so those would be the primary themes that I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, that I really see.
That's a great perspective. Covered a lot of ground. Patty.
So I would, we could talk about cyber. I just think that cyber is a data problem. You need to be able to watch an enormous quantity of data and transactions and movement of supply or any other information, and build that analytical muscle to really detect anomalies, which is where machine learning can come into that, et cetera. So again, data is such an important part of everything that we see coming. And I think streaming of data will be a major technology invention as we get better with compute capacity to be able to see a lot more data in real time. And I would also, all the data that's going to come from connected devices. I mean, inventory visibility is just, so enabled by lots of ways to track, but you've got to make something with that data. You've got to be able to make it actionable. So, IoT, I think, is going to be a huge positive disruption. And the only thing I would add, I totally agree with point of care. I mean, I think one of the things we have to watch in healthcare is patient expectations. Patients are getting their diapers delivered same day from Amazon, right? I mean, the disruptors like Amazon with PillPack, right? How they're I mean, they are going to be living in a world that their expectations are going to constantly change about ease of use, ease of everything, making life simpler. I mean, I think telehealth in some ways just has been simpler for patients, right? They don't have to drive to a doctor's office. And that simplification and that patient expectation is going to come from other industries. So we have to pay attention to what's going on at the patient, what the patient expects. One of the things I love about being in healthcare is all of us in the supply chain for medical devices care about the patient. That's what we're in business for. And I think that disruption is going to continue to raise expectations.
I agree, Patty. We talk about omni-channel quite often, and that instant delivery, regardless as to where you're getting care, it's going to be critical.
And I would just build on that by saying that home care, so like, for example, at Baxter, peritoneal dialysis, which is home-based dialysis versus clinic dialysis, it's so much better for the patient. It's less water intensive, but it requires a lot of information and the patient actively involved in their actual treatment at a level that wasn't there before. So how we connect to that patient, how do we give them a platform for which they and their physicians can actively communicate about, everything. Wearables will play into that, because it's another source of information that can be considered. So that's a specific example, that we're spending a lot of time on at Baxter.
The consumer is going to tell us where they want to be and how they want to be cared for.
Yep, I agree.
Have a role. KT.
Consumerism is definitely, thank you, definitely a trend. And if we look at this home-based healthcare, and you mentioned, peritoneal dialysis, anything that engages the patient. I think that technology that brings the patient, or if you want to call them consumers, or whatever you want to, how you want to refer to the people that that we care and love, care for and love. Those are the things where technology is going to be disruptive. And anything that brings that relationship closer will have a difference. Just want to circle back on, we were talking about data and the importance of that. Just one other thing to look over in the next 5 years, in the interest of time. We talked about cyber earlier on, where the idea is that you have external threats that are, whether it's ransomware or a colonial pipeline, right? Or here in the U.S., we're seeing very real, very real activity that disrupts our lives. So that's one kind of, cyber issue. The other one that we touched on earlier before was around PHI, and I also this kind of to circle back on the conversation on AI. It's an area where I think we're still learning where this is going to go. There are some companies that are staking their reputations on making privacy a cornerstone of their kind of corporate model. There are others that have not done such a good job of privacy. And as you know, in healthcare, it's a much bigger deal when we talk about protected healthcare information. So I don't know where the cards are going to land if regulatory change will make it easier for us to have people opt in to or opt out of research. But we do know that in order to advance models in healthcare, having access to data is paramount. And right now we're a bit hampered when we de-identify data to the point where extracting meaningful information becomes challenging. And just wanted to bring that up as kind of a bigger, broader issue in terms of technology. But again, the driver behind a lot of what we've been talking about today is increasingly data. And whether you're doing that for insights or for making predictions, I do see that as really a big change in the next 5 years.
Great, KT, we appreciate that. I want to turn us now. We've kind of, I think, wonderfully gone through these questions that raise so many issues, and I appreciate everyone's specificity in talking about, not just in general terms, but talking about specific things that would be useful and applicable for our audience dialed in today. I want to take the last few minutes. We've got about seven more minutes. I want to take some questions. We have a few questions that have been submitted, and I'm going to try to quickly turn these over to the panel, to the group, to anybody to respond. But if you can keep your answer really short, and so that we can move through as many of these as possible. The first question relates to interoperability standards, and in specific, since we're talking about medical devices, with respect to medical devices. And the question is, do you think we'll see FHIR adoption? Fast Healthcare Interoperability, FHIR. I think most people dialed in would know that. Do you think we will see FHIR adoption be an important matter here, and will it really become a requirement for everybody? Quick answer. Anyone?
I'll jump on. Yeah, I'll jump on that one. Yeah, sure. I do see it becoming, well, it's mandated. So the 21st Century's Care Act mandates the use of APIs and the use of things like FHIR to implement those APIs. So it's going to impact lots of different areas, from billing and the supply chain that we talked about, all the way out to results reporting, and also the use of AI. We're seeing now. I sit on some standards committees where we're using using FHIR to communicate with AI process. And again, it gets back to this idea of it's the boring, mundane part of workflow, which is communicating with, behind the scenes of patient presents, patient needs, some AI done on a medical image. The AI is done, that result is returned, the clinician, makes a determination, and then the results are reported. So all kind of mundane workflow issues that are assisted by interoperability standards, but terribly important to advance things in the digital age.
Yeah, so that's a big yes. Joe, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think that a combination of standards and innovation will get us through it.
Great. I'm going to go to a question from Victor Costa. Is listed here. Disruptions in the next year are possible, are not technology, but in regard to standards and management. And the question is, tell us the best medical device that respects guidelines and standards for integration in the supply chain hospital situation. Can anybody want to comment on that? Give us an example of the medical device that best sort of comports with this.
Well, being the medical device manufacturer, I'll take a whack at that. Take a crack at that one.
Yeah.
So, without getting into specifics on with any vendor, I think you really need to look at, when you go out for a tender or RFP, it's looking at the things that are important to your organization, right? So if connectivity is important to you, if interoperability is important to you, look at those things, and find partners that can help you wade through these issues, because they're complex. And so the question around what's the best device, I think that's going to vary widely by what it is that you're trying to buy. Are you trying to buy a CT machine? Are you trying to buy a glucose, a monitor, whatever it is? But the important thing is to find a partner who can help you, I think, who can help you negotiate this process and come through this process, so that you both feel like you have a better understanding of what you're looking for in the end.
Great.
Bill, this is Patty. The word best is what threw me to find the best. But I think that it's relevant to every medical device to really say, how does it interoperate? Take something just as basic as injection or infusion, where you've got pumps, you have fluids, you have drugs, sometimes compounded. There's a lot of opportunities for failure effects throughout that chain that can impact patient safety. And so, I would look for the companies that are innovating with that safety in mind, making sure that they connect, because every single step in the hospital doesn't interoperate all the time either, right? And it depends on the systems they use and your ability to connect into those systems. And it's not straightforward. And if it's connected to an actual delivery of a treatment, then it's likely to need FDA approval, and putting that into your quality and your rigor processes around that needs to be done. So I would look for the companies that are really looking at that holistically.
Great.
I would suggest nobody's got it nailed end to end. So that you're right. That best word kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop as well.
That was the question. I want to just very quickly, got 1 minute, and I want to just get it just a quick 1 minute, 10-second response about telehealth. I mean, that has played such a huge role in this past 12, 14 months. Where do you see it going forward, Joe? I'll just quickly, what percent of visits, outpatient visits, do you think?
I watched an industry-wide projection yesterday on all the service lines, and telehealth. What they suggested is we saw a 20% increase as an industry during COVID. They see that retracting a bit over the next couple years, but then over the next 10, increasing by 30%.
Wow. Patty?
Yeah.
What's your take?
I think that KT mentioned it, but I think telemonitoring is definitely going to take off. I see it, for example, in pharmacies. If you don't have enough pharmacists, how do you make sure you have pharmacist coverage? Yeah. By telemonitoring. I think that's got a lot of opportunity really fast for efficiency in particular.
KT, 10 seconds. Wow. So I think not only is it home monitoring of these visits, but the addition of wearables and information that you're generating yourself. So whether that's a genetic test or anything like that, it's all going to become part of the medical record. There's provisions for it. There's upcoming standards that will make that happen. Great. Okay, panelists, fantastic presentation today. Really appreciate the very animated and insightful dialogue. We appreciate this discussion, and I'm going to turn it back over to our organizer, Sanana. I don't know if you want to say anything or we need to say anything else before we close up.
Excellent use of time there. Very interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Bill. Thanks, Joe, Patty, and Katie. Thank you all for joining us. I see more questions are coming in. We'll send the answers to you later. And also the link to the recording will be sent later this afternoon. Hope to see you at some of our future events. Till we meet again. Bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.